All right, guys, welcome in this evening. Hey, let's give it up for our worship team. Thank you guys for everything. Also, did anyone see like Will's gnarly guitar grab in the middle of the first song? Like, dude, like, I'm so impressed. And then he like continued to play the entire set like absolutely nothing happened, and I was just like, dang. So if you don't know Will's pretty cool. Another thing about Will and oh man, I'm going to blank on his name. Simon, you guys are doing a Bible study, right, on Wednesdays. Yeah, just over the summer because we're not doing life groups or anything like that. So that's a great idea. If you guys, you guys should do that as well. That if you're not in a Bible study or in a life group or anything like that right now, that get together with some of your friends, open the Bible, and I think they're going to the book of Romans, which good luck to you guys. But yeah, super glad you guys are here this evening. We're going to jump into our new series this week. If there's any way we can bring the lights down, it's like I feel like I'm in the Shekinah glory of God right now. Thank you, appreciate it. Super glad you guys are here. We're gonna start this new series called Created for Glory, and yes, that face is gonna be staring at you for like 5 straight weeks. Get used to it. I saw the geometric face and I was like, digging it. That's going on the next thing. But yeah, so we're doing this series called Created for Glory. And in some ways, it goes right off of where we were at summer camp. And so if you weren't here at summer camp, that doesn't mean you missed out on any of the fun. It just means that what we covered, the most important part of what we covered in summer camp was 2 Corinthians chapter 5, believe verses 14 through 21, where it talks about how we are new creations in Christ, that the old is gone, the new has come, and that God has called us into being his ambassadors and to being a part of his kingdom and what he is doing. And in a lot of ways, this sermon series, even though it is unplanned for it to be this way, God kind of worked this out pretty great. It actually worked out that this sermon series kind of is a great follow-up to really what does it actually mean and look like for us to be ambassadors for Christ. And so our aim and hope in this series is really this, is that the aim and hope is that for all of you that you would see either for the first time or that you would be reminded that you have been intentionally designed and created for God's glory. That you've been intentionally designed and created for God's glory. And this isn't just any kind of random vain glory, but this is the soul-satisfying glory of God. And you might say that's a pretty big sentence, and it is, but we're going to unpack that over the next kind of couple of weeks, and we're going to look at how the way that God has created us, the way that God has made us, is so that we would actually enjoy him. I mean, this is what we were talking about even for the past couple of weeks before we even jumped into summer camp, is that Jesus is inviting you into a relationship with him. And this relationship that he's inviting you into, that he's inviting us into, is one where we get to see the very glory, the very truth, the very goodness and beauty of God. And it's actually something that deeply, deeply satisfies our souls. And so I think it's fair to ask the question, why? Why do we need to spend a series talking about God's glory and how we were created for glory and really getting down to this idea of identity? Why do we need to spend 5 weeks doing it? I think that's a good question to ask before we jump into a new series. And it's simply this. It's in our fallen condition, in the kind of like the fallen state of our hearts, because sin has entered into our hearts and in our lives, whether you're inside the church or whether you're outside the church, our world at this current moment is pretty radically confused about how we form and shape our identity. And if you don't know what the word identity means, it's a simple phrase just about like, who am I? Like your identity is who you are, how you make sense of who you are and how your life kind of fits together, where you find your meaning and your purpose in life. And our world at this moment, it's really, really confused about what that all looks like. And I mean, you don't have to look very far. Like one of the worst jokes I've heard is like a vegan CrossFitter walks into a bar and like, what does he begin to talk about first? Like, it's like, people like, yeah, like I'm a vegan, and I'm totally throwing my wife underneath the bus here and myself. But it's like, it's vegan, or it's like, no, I'm gluten-free or I'm dairy-free. Or I love how Hannah tells me, she's like, I just drink like cow milk. Like what's weird about, like there's like a lot of hate going on in milk right now. But then it's like, you got some people that it's like, I do CrossFit and only CrossFit CrossFit because everything else is not CrossFit, and you got other guys who do strength training, or, it's either like Apple or Microsoft, or it's like I only have Apple products and that probably means your parents make a lot of money, or it's Microsoft and Android and it's like, bro, I know exactly what that's like. Or it comes down to sometimes like the teams that we like. So, it's the Seahawks, or I know everyone like boos John for the 49ers. Like, dude, why do you even like them? But it goes to other things as well, where we try to find identity. Like sometimes it has to do with how much money your parents make, and so maybe you live in a really nice, affluent neighborhood, or maybe you're a little bit more like me, and there was always more month at the end of the paycheck, like when I was growing up, and it was always like, dang, like where are we gonna find money to pay for everything? Or maybe it's education, like some of you guys are in public school, some of you guys are in private school, some of you guys are in homeschool, some of you guys are in Christian school, and it's like, man, like all these people, like I know I've seen the looks between like homeschoolers and public schoolers are like, like. Yeah, well, see, then don't look at people like that way. And so like we have all these different ways that we kind of differentiate and that we kind of shape and form our identity and who we are. And to take a bit of a serious turn, like it even gets as deep as like our sexuality, like who we are attracted to and what we like, that we even like, we make that all that we are, and it essentially becomes this thing that defines every single fabric and essence of our being, which just shows essentially the point that like we're really confused about how to shape and form our identity and who we are. And the goal of the series is to answer that pretty clearly. The reality is that we've been sold on this lie that's going around that the best way to find an identity is to make it for yourself. The best way to find identity is to make it for yourself. And here, let me explain why it's a lie. It's a lie because it can't be strong, because it implies that your identity and how you define who you are is based on you. And let's just be honest for a moment. Like we know some things to be true about ourselves. We change. We change our mind all the time. Like I've been trying to buy a birthday gift for Sophia. It's her birthday tomorrow, and she's changed her mind like 6 times. Like I don't even know what I bought. I just know that there's stuff that I'm gonna give her, and I hope it's what she likes. But in a more serious way, like our minds change. Like we mess up, we fail, we succeed in some other things. Like we're not even a dependable source of our own identity, because we're always constantly changing our minds. We go from one thing to the next. And imagine that, the fluctuation between one thing and the next thing and the next thing, and you're so confused about who you are and about how we find our identity. Which leads me then to make the conclusion that probably the strongest identity is not the one that you create for yourself, even though that's what the world will tell you to do, but it's the identity that someone else gives you. The identity that someone else gives you. And so this is a double-edged sword. If you guys know what a double-edged sword is, it's a sword that's sharp on 2 edges. And it's a double-edged sword because a lot of times, you guys are laughing because that doesn't make sense. Trust me, people don't understand stuff sometimes. It's a double-edged sword because often the greatest pain and the most hurt we experience is from one thing that one person said to us. It's the parent or the close friend who said, wow, you'll just never amount to anything. You're a failure, or you're just not good enough. Or maybe it's the coach who said, yeah, you're not good enough for varsity, like you're cut. And I don't know why this is funny. I'm trying to be serious here. But there are these different things in our hearts and that happen in our lives that we then latch onto those things. We latch onto what those people say about us, and they define who we are. We give them. It's like giving someone the keys to your heart, and you're like, here, take these keys, and the thing that you said and the way that you treated me, I'm going to give you the keys to my heart, and I'm going to let you define who I am. And once again, the identity that's given to you by another person is then equally as unreliable, simply because that person changes too. Which leads to the last and final conclusion, that the only identity that's worth having and the only identity that we can trust is the one that's given by someone who is eternal, someone who is unchanging, someone who is ever faithful. who never changes his mind or just decides to stop loving us. The only person who can give us an identity that can actually get us through all of life is God. And he's created us for this glory. And so what we're going to see here in this passage and during the sermon series is that from the very beginning of time, from Genesis 1, our identity has been under attack. We'll see in Genesis 1, verses 26 through 28, that God has created us to worship him. He's created us to enjoy him, to be a part of what he is doing, to love him, to show others his truth, his goodness, and his beauty. We're going to see all of those things. But then we're also going to see that as soon as Genesis 3, we're 3 chapters into this whole Bible, and what we come to see is that from the very, very beginning, this idea of who we are and how we define ourselves and how we make sense of what am I supposed to do in life and who am I supposed to become and what am I supposed to do, it's under attack from the very, very beginning. And so the key to understanding where we're going tonight and in the rest of the series is this: what we reflect shows what we behold. What we reflect shows what we behold. So let me kind of unpack that statement, because I doubt many of you guys are like, behold, I've appeared. Like, none of you guys are saying that. And so behold, what I mean by the word behold is that it's this thing that maybe the better way to think of it is something that you would take a mental hold of. It's the thing that it's like a mirror or something that you're focusing in on, that you're looking at, and these things that we love and that we cherish and that we enjoy, that we spend time thinking about, that we spend time searching the internet for, that we long for, over time, those things, whether it's a person, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a hobby, whether it's something, whatever it may be, the more and more time that we spend looking and gazing into that thing, we begin to reflect it. We begin to reflect the thing that we behold. It begins to shape who we are. And we're going to unpack how we can, by understanding and knowing God's glory and knowing that God has created us for his glory, we can actually make sense of how to reflect God in everything that we do. That God is not just a compartment in our lives, but he becomes something that we take into everything that we do. And so that concludes probably like the longest introduction to a sermon series I've had, so that makes one for Steve and for me this week. But I'd love for you to open up your Bibles to Genesis chapter 1. So Genesis chapter 1, it's the first book in the Bible. And so literally just, you're going to get through like the not inspired like table of contents, and then like probably a little preface, and then it's going to say Genesis. And that's where we're going to start tonight. And we're going to read through the whole Bible, and we're going to be here for 2 weeks. Just kidding, we're not going to do that. So Genesis 1. And so right there in the beginning, I really honestly, if I had a ton of time, which is a nice way of saying if you guys had enough attention span, I would love to read through like Genesis 1 and 2 and kind of unpack everything. No, we're not going to do it. Trust me, you guys don't want to be here that long. We're going to start with Genesis 1, verse 1, and I'm going to slowly unpack this and then summarize some of it and point out some things, and we're going to come back to it and apply this to our life. So in Genesis 1:1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the water." So God enters into this chaos, and he comes to bring order. In verse 3, it says, "And God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day." And so what then goes on from here is that there's these 6 days of creation. On the seventh day, God rests. And there's like this drumbeat, there's this cadence that God creates everything that we know in the world. He creates land, and he separates the land from the sea, and he separates the air from the land and from the sky, and he makes all these things, and he begins to fill all of the earth with things. And so he puts vegetation and different grass and all these kinds of stuff, and he creates mountains and all these different things, and then he fills the sea with sea creatures, and he fills the sky with airs, and he puts animals on the land. And there's this drumbeat and this cadence as he's creating. And every time he gets done creating something, he says, "It is good. It is good. It is good." And then eventually, once he gets done creating the animals, he says to the animals, there's something a little bit different here. He blesses them. He blesses them, and then he goes on and he says, "I'm giving you a job to do." And he said, go into the world, be fruitful and multiply. And essentially what God is saying to them is that go and do what I have commanded you to do, animals, creatures, all these different things, and obey what I've commanded you to do, and bring me glory by obeying what I've commanded you to do. And then we get to Genesis 1:26, and we see that he creates mankind. And this is very different because something's changing here, because he's not just making anything now. He's not just making stuff. This is the crowning jewel of his creation, the one thing that is going to co-rule with him in the world. And so this is what he says in verse 26. He says, then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over everything creeping that creeps on the earth. And so God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish and over the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life. I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Hey guys, I don't know what you're laughing about, but if you need to go step outside, go take a moment. So God creates man and woman. He creates mankind, and it's totally different because he creates them. He hasn't created anyone else like this, but he creates man and woman in his image to reflect his likeness, to be like him in all that they do and all that he calls them to do. And he blesses them, and he says, I've also got a job for you, mankind. He says, I've got a job for you, and your job is to go into all the world and also to be fruitful and to multiply. But there's a bit of a difference here as well. And he says, I'm calling you into this world to take dominion and to subdue everything that is in creation. Essentially, let me translate it for you. What he's saying here is he's saying to mankind, he's saying to Adam and Eve, to the man and the woman, he said, I want you to be like me, and I want you to take my glory and the worship of me, my name, my praise, my worship, and I want you to fill the entire earth with all of it. I want you to make more people who worship me. I want you to, and everything that you do, in the way that you grow a farm or whatever the way that you raise a family, and everything that you do, fill the world with my glory and with my worship and with my praise. And so our first point is really simple. It's this. It's that the world and everything in it glorifies God. God creates everything, and as he creates everything, he gives its purpose and he gives it identity. And this identity is to give glory and praise and worship to God. And then to us, as mankind, he gives this identity not just to be another creature in his creation, but to be the very image bearers of God. The theologians call it co-regency, which is a really fancy way of saying that God is saying, I want you to rule with me. I want you to with the same authority, in the same way that I've created these things. I want you to go into the world, and I want you to be like me, to image me and to reflect me in everything that you do. And he says that as you do this, I want you to participate in my work with me, and I want you to have community and communion with me. And we see this because we read on later on in chapter 2, which is kind of like this zooming into the story of how God creates us. And we see that God actually walks with Adam and Eve in the garden. There's literally no separation in any way, shape, or form between God and man. Not that they're equal, but there's no separation in relationship because there's nothing there to get in the way. And this is the beginning of like the unpacking of this whole idea that God has created us to give him glory and to worship him. And this becomes this very kind of key identity piece of who we are. But before we go any further, let's just define for a moment like what glory is, okay? Because sometimes we miss what it is. A helpful way to describe what glory is, it's the singular, unique splendor that belongs only to God. Singular, unique splendor that belongs only to God. It's the fullest display of truth, goodness, and beauty in the most fullest extent of those words. The most beautiful thing, the most good thing, the most truthful thing, the thing of the most highest integrity, the thing of the most highest worth and worthiness of praise. That is what is God's glory. And not only is it that, but it also then it carries with it a certain kind of consequence. God's glory changes what we're supposed to do and how then we're supposed to respond to it. And so then our identity then is we are created by God for God. We're created by God for God, and we're created to worship him in everything that we do, and like we see here in the very beginning, to spread his glory all throughout the world. And so you might be thinking at this point, man, like we're spending a lot of time unpacking this really old passage, but this shapes and it forms how we live today. It's because we don't have a foundation like this that we often miss the point. And so it's these kind of foundational texts that shape and form how we are to make and to form our own identity and to do it around what God has created us to be, what he's created us to do, the purpose that he's made us for. And in that, we actually find the most joy. And so the story goes on a little bit. In Genesis 2, verses 16 through 17, we see that God essentially says, and the Lord God commanded the man, saying, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden. So he places him in this garden called Eden. But he says, of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in that day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. And so here's a really key part to our identity as Christians. It's that God has given us everything that we need. God has not been stingy or reluctant or I guess not good, ungood to us. He's given us everything that we need. And he says, I've given you everything. There's just this one thing that I don't want you to partake in. I don't want you to eat of this one tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because if you eat of it, you will surely die. And it's on this point, this one sentence, that we see the entrance of another character in the story in the form of a serpent. And it's Satan. He's considered the evil one. And he's this cunning and deceptive serpent who comes in and he begins to make his move. And it leads us to our second point, which is this, that the problem is the serpent and our image. He comes in and he says then in Genesis 3, verse 4, he says to Adam and Eve, he says, yeah, I know God said all that stuff about, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, but he's like, God didn't really mean that, right? Like, you're not actually going to die if you eat of that, right? And kind of see here in a way, go back and read this in your own time and you'll see what the serpent does. And he offers to them what they already have. He says, if you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, then you can become like God. Isn't that better? That you can become like God? And what the trick is, what the thing that is deceptive here is that the serpent is offering to them what they already have. They already are like God. They already are image bearers. They don't need anything else. And every form of sin and temptation is this at its heart. We already have everything that we need. But yet here comes a serpent offering them something else. He offers them what they already have. And this is the core of the struggle that you and I face, that God has given us all that we need, but yet we spend so much of our lives drawn in and focused in on the one thing that we don't have. And for every single person in that room, it's different. There are these maybe insecurities or things that we long for that we might not have. And what sin does when it enters into our hearts and into our lives is it draws us into this one thing. And when we see that we don't have this one thing, then we call into question God's character. And we say, God, you're not really that good because you haven't given me this one thing. When all of creation stands in like ovation and praise of God, testifying to how generous and how gracious God has been to us. And so we see, like we talked about earlier, from the very, very beginning, the evil one, the serpent, has been trying to steal and has been trying to attack our identity, and he does it in full force here. But realize this attack that Satan kind of employs here, it lines up with his character. John 10:10 talks about how the evil one, he comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And that's what the serpent comes in here to do, to steal God's glory, to kill our hope, and to destroy the image of God in us. And then we see that Adam and Eve, they eat of the tree, and they fall into sin. And all of humanity, you and I, are caught up in this grand cosmic story where we struggle with sin and our identity is broken and we go to the wrong things and the wrong people, the wrong actions to try and find our hope and our meaning and our purpose, to fill the void that sin has created in our hearts. And that void is a separation that we experience because we're separated from God because of sin. And in all of that, the evil one is just whispering in your ear, just look at what you don't have. Don't look at what you do have, look at what you don't have. And I know we're getting into the weeds here, but look at the subtlety here. Take for a moment that this is like a lesson on how temptation and how the temptation to sin works. It's never like all out full scale war. It's really, really subtle tactics. It's like guerrilla warfare where the evil one is just trying to inch you 1 inch, one day at a time away from what God has created you to be. He plants the thought in your heart and your mind that there's that one person in your life that if you can just have their love or their care, then everything would be okay. And inch by inch, day by day, Satan will move you all the way to this point where your identity and who you are is entirely defined by the attention that you might get from someone else or some other friend group or some other kind of person. Or maybe it's a small thought that, man, like, I just need to be in control right now. I need to experience some kind of pleasure to make whatever I'm experiencing go away. And inch by inch, day by day, one lustful thought after another, we end up, over many years, the broken sexuality, where we abuse other people and we steal their image and their innocence for ourselves and hurt them in the process. It starts with a thought of, man, I just need to be affirmed, I need to be right. And then inch by inch, day by day, of living a life of thinking those things, we become the person who says, everyone else is wrong and I'm right. That when anyone ever comes to challenge us in something, nope, you're just a toxic person, get out of my life. If you're not here to affirm me and to love me, then I want to have nothing to do with you. Or maybe it's just that one thing, that one item that you're like, man, if I can just get that one thing, if I can just own this one possession, then I'll be happy. And inch by inch, day by day, one possession after one possession after the next, we end up cynical and resentful. Bitterness has taken root in our hearts. We are envious people and we covet, wanting what other people have. Once again, only focusing on what we don't have and never seeing all that God has given us. All of those things, they shape who we are. These things consume our lives and our hearts and our minds, and we become people who identify and are shaped, and who we are is caught up in all of these things. And all these things display the same truth that we talked about at the beginning. The things that change, an identity that's based on something that's changed, it's always going to disappoint us. whether it's in another person or it's in a finite thing, it's always going to disappoint. And so having an identity apart from God, we can conclude, it literally just leaves us stuck. It leaves us blind. We can't see. We can't even make sense of the world around us and what we're supposed to do and what our purpose is and how we're supposed to care and maybe love for other people, because all we can see is the nothingness that's in front of us because we're focusing in on something that keeps on changing. We're not able to even see what God has truly given us. And so I'm fast forwarding through the story quite a bit here, but in Genesis 3:15, what we end up seeing is, and I think this is one of the most important verses in the entire Bible, we see what happens in the rest of the story, that Adam and Eve, they sin against God and they fall into sin, and then they realize, oh my gosh, like we don't even have clothes on, like we're naked and we're ashamed, and they run off and they go and like sew fig leaves and they go and hide behind a bush to hide from God, and then God walks into the garden and God says, where are you? And it's this moment, and don't miss this character trait of God. This is the moment where God initiates. This is the moment where God comes after us and he says, I'm not going to leave you alone in your sin to figure it out by yourself. I'm coming to you. Where are you, Adam and Eve? I want to know where you are. I mean, he's God. He already knows what happened. But this is God pursuing and coming to us, and he says, where are you? And they explain what happens. And God, being the good and holy God that he is, follows through with what he said he would do. He says this has to be made right. Justice has to come because God's law was broken. And so he pronounces a judgment over the man and over the woman and over the serpent. But in the judgment, even in God's judgment, there is hope and there is salvation. And in Genesis 3:15, he says to Eve, he says, the seed of the woman will crush the head of the seed of the serpent. And you might be like, the seed of the what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's kind of confusing. What he's saying here is he's saying, Eve, there will be a man who comes from your lineage, from your line, from your family, and one day he will forever crush the head of the seed of the serpent. He will forever crush the power of sin and death. And if you want some homework, go read Matthew 1. Go and read the first 2 chapters of Luke. And these 2 long lineages. And what we see from cover to cover is that this is God's story about how he promised that he would come and make all things new, and that he did it. He followed through. He didn't ghost us and just leave us to be by ourselves, but he actually showed up and he did something about it. And what we see is that from Adam to Eve to this whole long line of people, and these are messed up people. This is not like a PG book. A lot of messed up people. God brings his plan. He because he's created them for glory. And that doesn't mean they have to be perfect, but it means that they go into the world and they fill the world with his glory, with his praise, and with his worship. And so through this long, long line of people, finally, at the end, after 4,000 years, we see that the promised one shows up, the Messiah, the anointed one, and his name is Jesus, and his name is Emmanuel. It's God with us. He promises that one would come to make all things new. And it leads us to our third point, which is this, is that God sent his son Jesus to restore his image in us. And so if you got a Bible, you got a phone, turn over to John 1. It's the 4th gospel in the New Testament. And read here what John says as he connects what's going on in the Old Testament to what is going on here in the New. In John 1, verse 1, he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. Now, in the beginning, that sounds a lot like Genesis 1. It's because he's trying to draw the same parallel here. And he's saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Wait, who? Jesus. Jesus was there with God in the beginning, creating all things, creating all people for his glory and for his praise and for his worship. Jesus was there. Jesus is God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light, the Son, Jesus, shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And then slide down to verse 9, and it says, the true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. That's that blindness that we're talking about. He came to his own people, and they did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, to all who do receive Jesus, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory is of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and full of truth. God promises that he would send the seed of the woman to crush the head of the seed of the serpent. And God fulfills the promise. He sends his Son, his very own Son, Jesus. Jesus, the Son of God, fully, perfect, completely God, to be fully, perfectly, completely man, just like us, from the same line that Eve was in, to fulfill the promise and to restore the image of God in us that has been broken because of sin. And he does that by living a life that's perfect, that we could never live, dying on the cross on our behalf, taking the just punishment that we heard that needed to happen in the very beginning, taking that on himself so that it didn't have to come on us. And then he dies, burying the power of the serpent, of sin, and of death, and of the grave, and of every broken identity, and every false identity that someone else might give you, breaking all of the power of all of those things. And he resurrects and he says, I've come to bring you new life. I've come to bring the Garden of Eden back. I've gone to essentially shorten the divide, to eliminate the divide and the separation that was there because of sin. And I've come to restore a relationship with God and with man. And this isn't just Jesus and God coming and saying like, oh, I'm going to make you better. This is not about being made better. It's about being made completely and utterly new. He comes to make us a new creation, and then he comes back, and this part gets me so psyched. I've never said that word before. And he goes on to say, he's like, I'm going to give you the same commandment I gave you at the beginning is the same one I'm going to give you here. He said, I told you in the very beginning, go into all the world and fill all of the world with my glory and with my praise and with my worship. And in Matthew 28, he says, go into all the world and do what? Make disciples. Fill the world with people who praise me and worship me. It's the same thing we focused in on over summer camp in 2 Corinthians 5, 20 and 21. He says, go be ambassadors with the same rule, with the same authority, with the same charge. Go and carry the message. Go and carry the message that people can be reconciled to God. He's created us for glory, guys. He's created us to partake in what he is doing. This isn't some random Marvel universe story. This is the grand plan of redemptive. You know where Marvel gets all of its good ideas? From the stinking Bible. You want to see timelines weaving together? Go read the book of Ruth. That this random non-Jewish lady somehow enters into there's 3 prostitutes in Jesus' lineage. This is crazy. But this is God's story, and he's bringing us into it. He's saying, I want you to be a part of what I'm doing, and so stop looking at your screen, stop looking at your funny jokes, whatever it is, and stop getting caught up in what your friends think about you, because it doesn't matter, and you're not going to be friends with anyone in this room anyways after high school. Like he's saying, just forget about it. And he's saying, I've called you to something so much greater. That you and I get this. We were sinners, and we were in rebellion against God, literally giving God the bird every single day of our lives. And then God saves us, and he makes us new, and he gives us a new heart, he gives us a new life, and then we get to be a part of his work of saving people from the darkness of sin. that they might have new life and new hope in Jesus. I mean, talk about a comeback story. Good grief. And this is what he's calling us to. That we get to be the ones who carry the message to other people, to your friends, whether you're in homeschool, whether you're in public school, whether you're in private school or Christian school, to carry the story. And not just a story, the truth that man can be reconciled with God. That our broken image, our brokenness, our insecurity, all of the fallenness in our hearts and our lives, it can be made new in Jesus. That's glorious. And it makes our hearts sing and praise like we sang in the last song. Let every nation, let every tribe, let every tongue, let every knee bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. And in that, what we're going to unpack over these next couple of weeks is that we're going to see that it's when we praise and when we worship God, that's when we finally understand what it means to be human. That's when we finally understand what it means to actually live. Is when our hearts are worshiping the thing that does not change. And that's God in heaven. That we find our hope, our security, our pleasure, our freedom in Jesus and not in ourselves or what anyone else says. I know I've gone wildly long in this sermon, but that's okay. What's the next step out of this? For some of you, it's pretty simple. You need to be reconciled to God. You've been living in separation from God. Maybe you've even been in church for a long time, or you've been going to Christian school, but you're like, dude, I'm not checked in with this Jesus thing, and I want to check in. I want to opt in. And if that's you, I would love to have a conversation with you about that after the service and to talk about how you can be reconciled to God. It's really simple, but also it costs a lot. And so it's something that you should consider greatly. For others of you, it's time for your identity to change. You've been living and basing your life off of what other people think about you, about what you do, about what activities or sports, whatever it is. There's something else that's defining who you are. And tonight is the night that you need to tell your life group leader or you need to tell a friend, hey man, I've been living for something else. Something else has been defining me. I need to be honest about that. Can you please help me to build my identity and who I am on Jesus and on God? And whether you're in one of those two categories as well, we also need to kind of take a moment and evaluate in our hearts to think about what am I focusing on? What am I spending my time on? What am I thinking about? What am I living for? What is the thing that I'm intently beholding? What's the thing I keep on going back to when life gets hard? What is the thing I'm running to? Because undoubtedly that thing is probably the thing that's shaping who you're becoming. And so, in light of all these things, I just want to end our time just praying, and I don't want you to listen to me pray at you. And so, I want you just for a couple of moments, for like 15 or 20 seconds, I want you to just pray a simple prayer. Just God, would you open my eyes to see in my heart how my identity might not be shaped and formed on you? And so let's take a moment to pray those things. I'm going to pray that as well, and then we'll wrap up our time together. And I got a couple of more announcements for you guys. Father, we don't want to be defined by something else that's going to lead us to less joy. We want to be defined by you, by the fact that you've made us in your image to reflect your glory, and to be a part of what you're doing. And so God, please, like a bulldozer, just get those things out of our hearts and our lives. Give us the eyes to see them so we might confess them to you, and that we might find freedom from them, Father, and find our hearts clinging to and holding on to the rock solid, immovable truth that you have made us in your image to reflect your glory. Father, please help us to bear gospel fruit in that way tonight and in the days to come and in the weeks to come. We pray this all in Christ's name. Amen.